In this video, I want to talk about how you take a passage that contains an induction by confirmation argument and find all the relevant information so that you can write the argument out as premises and a conclusion. So that's what I'll do here. I'll talk about how you should be reading the passage itself, what you should be looking for, and then once you've picked the passage apart, how you write out the premises. So we'll use this passage, which is posted online, and in fact, before we do anything, you should just read it so that you have a sense of what's in the passage, and then once you've done that, the second time you read it, you should be looking out for, these four things here, which you should recognize as important components that go into the induction by confirmation argument. So you want to be looking out for the hypothesis, that is the proposed explanation for some phenomenon, some problem that we want an explanation for. Second, the prediction. Third, the data that is compared to the prediction. And then lastly, and this is again just as you're reading through the passage, you should try to get a sense of whether or not the hypothesis is probably correct, probably not correct, or whether it's inconclusive. Is the passage, which one of these three does the passage seem to be suggesting? Okay, so at this point you should have read this. If you haven't, you should pause it and read it just so you know what I'm talking about. In this first paragraph here, we have this Dr. Semmelweis, and he has noticed this. That all these women, or roughly 10% of the women in this particular maternity division, have been dying. So this, on the one hand, is data. It's information. But on the other hand, even sort of more importantly, it's the problem that is going to be framing the whole passage. The problem itself doesn't really go into our argument, but as you're picking the passage apart, you might want to keep that in mind, that we have this problem, and then, of course, when we have a problem, we're going to want to propose a hypothesis that explains it. So in the second paragraph here, we see that, one, we have this physician who got cut on his finger, and he died, so that's more data. Okay, and then lastly, in this middle paragraph here, Semmelweis wondered whether the disease might be caused by something in cadaveric matter that was being transmitted. Okay, so this is not data. This is just what Semmelweis is thinking about. It's his proposal, or his suggestion. And so this is going to have a role in the argument. Okay, and then the third paragraph. So if this is right, then this is what we should find. The death rate will be cut dramatically simply by requiring physicians and students to wash their hands, etc., etc. Okay, so this then is the prediction. This is what we are expecting to find. If this proposal is correct, i.e., if this hypothesis is correct, this is what we should find. Okay, and then just to finish this up, you see that he did make the doctors wash their hands, and this is what happened. The death rate dropped to less than 2%. Okay, so then having read through it, this is if you'd read it once before I started talking about it, this is the second time you've read through it, and we've noted a number of important things. One, we have our hypothesis. Okay, good. Two, we have our prediction, also very important. But we've got a lot of different data. So when we get to premise 3 and we're thinking about what goes there, we're going to need to make a decision about what data we want to include and what data we don't want to include. But let me start writing this up. Okay, so our first premise is the hypothesis, and I'll type this up here and you can see how it goes. So recall here, of course, that the hypothesis is what we have here. We want to put this in our own words. And the basic idea that Semmelweis is proposing is that the doctors who are performing autopsies right before they go and examine these women are carrying something on their hands from the cadavers to the women, and that's causing the women to become ill with this childbed fever and dying at this unusually high rate. So I'll write this out as okay, then premise 2 is the prediction. So recall that our prediction here was that what we have right here, the death rate should drop if the doctors wash their hands. And the reason why Semmelweis predicted that, of course, is because, based on his hypothesis that something is being carried on the hands, if we clean the hands well, then whatever that is, and of course the hypothesis doesn't tell us specifically what it is, and there's no way really that anyone could have investigated in 19th century Vienna what exactly was being carried from the cadavers to the women. But if there's something there, then if we clean the hands well before the doctors examine the women, then we should find that the death rate will drop. Okay, so that's our prediction. Then for premise 3, we want the data. So when we're looking for the data that goes in premise 3, what we want is not all the data. We should not include everything that we've marked as data here. Rather, what we want is just the specific data that was compared to the prediction. That's the data that has a role in the argument. There's other data here. So for instance, the data that we have up here at the top in our first paragraph, this is data that was, sort of got Semmelweis, onto the problem. And then this other data here in the second paragraph, what we listed here, is important data, but this is data that helped Semmelweis form his prediction, or form his hypothesis. Okay, but what we want in premise 3 is this data down here, the data that we're going to compare to the prediction, or we're going to use to check the prediction, we might say, and then that's going to tell us something about the hypothesis. So after the doctors wash their after the doctors wash their hands, the death rate in the first division dropped to 2%. Recall that it had been 10% before Semmelweis forced the doctors to wash their hands. Okay, so that's what we want to have here in premise 3.